Hey guys, it's Timothy here. We're actually looking at the day 4 spoilers. This is technically Friday when I'm recording this, so there will be a couple cards from the early morning Friday spoilers tacked onto this. But I recorded a video on the Thursday spoilers yesterday, and the file unfortunately got corrupted or something happened to it to the point where I lost the recording. So I'm going to go back over those cards. Since you haven't seen that yet, or presumably, if you're watching this, you're interested in them. And then I'll tack on anything else that's been added since then. And there's already been at least 1 or 2 cards that we've seen this morning. So we'll go ahead and start off with what we have on screen here. Another split card or aftermath card, whatever you want to call it. It's hard not to call it a split card since it's technically not. But the card is Mouth to Feed. The card you cast from your hand is Mouth, which is 2 and a green. Sorcery. This is a rare, by the way, and it creates a 3/3 green hippo creature token. No elephants, hippos. But this is a fine card. It's essentially a 3-mana 3/3 of vanilla creature, and that's fine on curve. There are some sets where 3-mana 3/3s are just fantastic, and some sets where they're not amazing at all. Kaladesh being one of those where there were so many 3-mana 3-power creatures that it diminished how powerful a 3-mana 3/3 was overall. But I think this set is slow enough and probably going to be grindy enough that a 3-mana 3/3 is going to be good. And if there's anything that cares about you casting spells, any prowess cards or anything like that, then Mouth being a sorcery is relevant. The aftermath part is Feed, which is 3 and a green, and you cast from your graveyard. You draw a card for each creature you control with power 3 or greater. So I think the idea here is that they curve into each other well, but you're really not going to do that, right? You're not going to play this on turn 3 and then draw a single card on turn 4 with Feed. You want Feed to be drawing you at least 2 or more cards before it becomes pretty nice. I think Mouth is playable enough by itself that Feed is a nice little bonus attached to it, but I wouldn't go out of my way to make Feed work. Now, if you can draw multiple cards off of it, at least 2 or more cards, I think this is a nice little incentive to have this card in your deck. And it's also nice that these are both mono green and this isn't a split color card, so that you don't really have to force yourself or try to splash to be able to get the benefit of cast and Feed later in the game. It's just something that will come up at some point if you need to draw cards and you have a turn off where you can do it. 4-mana sorcery speed is a weak way of doing that, but remember that the aftermath cards are overpriced because they are bonuses that you get later in the game. It's like paying an extra little bonus to get something extra out of a card that you've already used, which I think is nice. I think this is a good one. I don't know if it's a rare. I could see passing it for a really strong uncommon or something like that, since it is really just 3-mana 3/3. But Pouncing Cheetah, another cat. Cats being very relevant now. 2 and a green for a 3/2 flash creature, a cat. Common. This is fine. I like flash creatures. Some sets have a lot and some sets don't. For instance, Kaladesh and Aether Revolt did not have a lot of flash creatures, but Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon had a pretty sizable number of flash creatures, and they are type of cards that you have to play around. They do change the way you attack. Sometimes if there is a set with no flash creatures that you're aware of, you probably just jam with everything if your opponent's open. But if not, you have to consider the fact that your opponent could splash this in. Flash it in during your end step and attack you back if you're open, or flash it in during combat and use it as a pseudo removal spell. This isn't going to get somebody, so to speak, like a lot of flash creatures will, because it does have such low toughness that it's still probably going to trade in combat unless it's blocking a 1/1 or something like that. But I don't know. It's a fine card. Putting flash on this doesn't make it that much better than just a vanilla 3-mana 3/2, but flash is a good ability and it gives it some flexibility. So I like Pouncing Cheetah. Just fine filler card, so to speak, not super powerful or anything. Colossipede. Not sure why I clicked this. It's just a vanilla creature, but 5-mana 5/5, 4 and a green, common insect. Not really a relevant creature type. This is good stats, right? This is exactly where you want to be on the vanilla scale. A 5-mana for 5 power and 5 toughness is pretty good. And I do think that this is one of the biggest creatures we've seen in the format so far. There are just generally smaller creatures in this format, so 5-mana 5/5 seems like it should get the job done. And if you can power this out early, like, it's pretty good. It's a step above Cow Prowler, right? Cow Prowler sucks. A 6-mana 6/6 for some reason is just worse than 5-mana 5/5. It's around the 6-mana mark that you really want to get like bonuses out of your 6 drops. You don't want them to just be vanilla creatures, or at least that's how I view it. I don't know about you guys. The next little batch here I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about because they are Planeswalker deck cards, which means that even though they'll be playable in Standard, you'll never see them in a pack of Amonkhet, so when it comes to Draft and Sealed, these cards aren't relevant. But just to very quickly skim over them, you have reprints of some of the bad tap lands. For mana fixin', you have a bird thing that can untap creatures if you control a Gideon Planeswalker. You have a zombie Naga that can drain your opponent if you control Liliana. You have Gideon's Resolve, which might just barely see play. I don't know. 5 mana to search for the Gideon Marshall Paragon. That's the one from the Planeswalker deck, and put it into your hand. It's an enchantment, by the way. And your creatures get an Anthem +1/+1. The only reason I say this one may see play, and I think that's a really big may, is that the new Gideon of the Trials, does incentivize you to have extra Gideons in your deck, and being able to search one up is pretty nice because of the emblem. It doesn't care what Gideon you have as long as the emblem's out. If you control a Gideon, you can't lose the game. Granted, this Gideon's not fantastic, and this card's expensive too. Plus, I believe that Gideon costs 5 mana, so you're taking a turn off to go fetch something that's going to cost 5 mana the next turn, but I don't know. Another way to fetch Gideon might be relevant. And then Liliana's Influence is 6 mana, 4 and double black to put -1/-1 counter on all of your opponent's creatures, and then you get to go search up that really bad Liliana and put it in your hand. It's a sorcery, by the way. I don't know. These cards aren't going to see play. Maybe Gideon's Resolve, but I don't really think that's going to happen. I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. But we're going to move on. If you want to evaluate those, look at them somewhere else, because I'm not too interested in Planeswalker deck cards when we're here to talk about how good a card is in Limited, right? Speaking of cards that are good and limited, this thing is a bomb. Regal Caracal, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right or not, but it's a 3 and double white for a 3/3. It's a rare cat creature. Other cats you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. Cat Lord. There's so many cats in this set too. Like, it's not, out of the round, out of the realm of possibility that this thing just pumps a good number of creatures on the board. But wait, there's more. When Regal Caracal enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with a lifelink. So you are getting a 7 power and 7 toughness out of this card across 3 bodies, 4 of which has lifelink, and then you are incidentally pumping any other cats you happen to already have on the battlefield, or play from that point forward. This card is just definition of straight limited bomb. You get so much power and toughness for just 5 mana, and it's spread out too. It's not like you're just paying a 5 mana 7/7 or anything like that. Not to mention the lifelink is very relevant, right? How does your opponent keep up with that? I mean, by the time you get to turn 5, your opponent might just have a 4/4, which brick walls all of these creatures, but they're not going to be able to attack into you without offering some sort of trade. Like, if you just trade off the 2 cat tokens for your opponent's 4/4, you still have this thing around. You still gained 4 life. You still soaked up 4 life, or 4 damage that your opponent was going to deal to you. I think this card is just a bomb on its own, and if you happen to have other cats in your deck, that's great too. This seems like the type of card I would pick up and then want to be white-green, because there's so many green cats in this set too. But I don't know. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And all those people clamoring for a Cat Lord, you got one. I don't know if there are people clamoring or not for a Cat Lord, but whatever. Throne of the God Pharaoh is 2 generic mana for a rare legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. I believe this is the little shrine that's on the masterpiece for Dark Ritual. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it is. Anyway, I don't think this card's good for limited. If you're in the type of deck, some sort of aggressive deck that wants you to just be attacking constantly, then that's fine. I think the idea here is that it works with exert cards pretty nicely, because your exert creatures will be tapped at the end of the turn, and then that'll cause your opponent to lose a life at minimum, 1, and then they stay tapped the next turn, and they're still going to lose life. I don't know what kind of deck this is going to be good in. I don't think it's that good, but it is the type of card. I'll go ahead and put a caveat on that, put an asterisk here. This is the type of card that if people play it against me and I find that it's actually quite annoying, or it's stacking up a decent amount of damage, I would probably consider changing my mind on this. It's the type of card I need to see in action first. If there are any wide token decks This is a nice way to push in a bunch of extra damage too at the end of the turn, assuming all of your tokens don't die. It is a little awkward that this triggers on your end step, meaning that your opponents can still trade with your creatures in combat, and then if your creature dies, it's not tapped on the end step. You don't get to drain your opponent out or anything like that. But I don't know. I'm not in love with the card, but I think I'll keep an eye on this one. I think I'm going to start it off as kind of a weaker rare, and then see if I have to change my mind later on. Looks like we might have a little bit of lag going on here, but we have Magma Spray back. I think this was last printed in somewhere during Theros block. I want to say Born of the Gods, but I'm not 100% sure. For those of you who aren't aware, Magma Spray is 1 red for an instant. It's a common here. Deals 2 damage to a creature, and if that creature dies during the turn, it gets exiled instead. I feel like this is printed here as a direct answer to, what's it called? Scrap Heap Scrounger in Standard, because that card is absurd. And this is a good way to exile it permanently instead of making it go back to the graveyard over and over again. In Limited, I think Magma Spray is a fine card, but you don't want too many of them. It is worth noting that if you're some sort of aggressive red deck, that Magma Spray only hits creatures. It can't hit players, so you can't use it like a Shock. But Shock is decent enough as a removal spell that you'll play Magma Spray pretty much the same amount of time. This is not like a top tier common in my opinion. I think it's just a solid card that you'd be happy to have in most red decks, maybe even 2 copies. But it's the type of card you could see yourself boarding out if it comes down to your opponent just having a bunch of high toughness creatures or something along those lines. And there are some really dirtily high toughness creatures in this set, so I don't know. Magma Spray, probably fine. There's nothing wrong with the card. I think it's just a fine card, but how good it'll be depends on how many total X2s and X1s are going to be in the format. Manglehorn, nice name, is 2 and a green for a 2/2 uncommon beast creature. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy an artifact, or I'm sorry, you may destroy an artifact. So if you're the only person with an artifact, you don't have to destroy it. And artifacts your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Again, I'm not sure if this is here to mitigate some problems in Standard. It's not like it's very good against vehicles because those vehicles aren't attacking the turn they come in anyway. Maybe against Aetherworks Marvel and a couple things like that. I'm not entirely sure. Your clue tokens come in tapped. Haha. But I don't know. Manglehorn seems like a fine limited card, more of a sideboard card than anything else. There aren't a lot of artifacts that we've seen that you should be clamoring to just destroy. Maybe if your opponent is playing some of the monuments, or if they have some really good rare artifact, this is the type of card that I'd be happy to have in my deck. But I don't think I'd start it as a 3-mana 2/2. If it's not destroying an artifact, it's not really a valuable card. If it does destroy an artifact your opponent controls, then it's super strong. And I'm more or less ignoring this ability for the purposes of Limited. If you go back and look at most of the artifacts we've seen, a lot of them still function even if they're tapped, so that's not really super relevant for Limited here. I imagine that's here for Standard, but I don't know. Manglehorn's a good card. It's a mini Rex Sage. It doesn't hit enchantments, but having the access to that sort of card is pretty nice out of green decks. Moving along as soon as I can, we have Battlefield Scavenger. Battlefield Scavenger. 1 in a red for a 2/2 uncommon Jackal Rogue. When it attacks, you may exert it. Whenever you exert a creature, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So the idea here is it doesn't have to be off of itself. When you exert it, you can discard, then draw. But this includes your other creatures. If you're exerting your other creatures, then you're allowed to do this rummage effect as well. Rummage being discard first instead of draw first. But that's a good ability, right? This is the type of card that you can play on turn 2. And if you find that you need to have your land drops, or your hand is just lacking something, a removal spell, or more pressure, more creatures, then you can discard cards you don't need, go find cards you do need. Very similar to everything I've said about cycling. That's exactly what this card does, is let you cycle something out of your hand whenever it attacks. On its own, it's not like a super powerful creature or anything. Like a 2/2 that attacks and rummages, I think, is good. That's very, very similar to just Reckless Racer from Aether Revolt. But Where this gets really nice is when you're exerting other creatures and you're getting that bonus out of them too. So I don't know that there's going to be a full-on exert deck when it comes to limited, but you will very likely have a couple exert creatures in your aggressive decks, and this is a nice little payoff for having them, or at least a nice little bonus that you can get for having a good number of exert creatures. And that Luden really helps to find something that can counteract the fact that your creatures are going to be tapped during the next turn if you're exerting them. Or, I don't know, give them Vigilance, then that doesn't matter. Speaking of exert, this card is very strong. Glory Bound Initiate is 1 and a white for a 3/1 rare human warrior. I don't know if the initiates are like a cycle or anything, because there's a green one that we've already seen as well. That was 1 in a green. But again, 3/1 for 2. When it attacks, you can exert it. If you do, it gets +1/+3 and gains lifelink until end of turn. That's a huge boost. This becomes a 4/4 lifelinker that you only pay 2 mana for, and even if that only attacks every other turn, that's really strong. Your opponent's not going to be able to keep up with an 8 mana life swing every other turn. If this attacked every turn, that would be insane. And even with this attacking just every other turn, that's pretty strong too. Like a 4 power, 4 toughness lifelinker on turn 2 is something your opponent's not going to be able to deal with. They're going to either have to chump block, or they're just going to have to take the 4, and then they're gaining 4 as well, which is pretty crazy. I think this card is super strong. The 1 toughness is a little bit of a liability, so things like Magma Spray do take it out, which is where you really want cards like that. But if you can't remove this right away, it is going to beat you down, and you're going to have trouble like racing a card like this. You're going to have to take it out, or finally bite the bullet and double block it or something along those lines. But I think this is a really powerful card. Standard playable, maybe. I have no idea. But for limited, I would first pick this guy in a heartbeat. I think he's super strong. Watchful Naga is our next card. It is... Oh no, did I click the Sphinx? Alright, let's talk about the Sphinx first since I clicked the Sphinx. Because this card's a bomb too. Curator of Mysteries, Mr. Sphinx here, is 2 and double blue for a 4/4 rare Sphinx. Bet you can't guess what keyword it has. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, you scry one. You may not, it is not optional, you have to scry one. And then you cycle this for a blue. Why you would ever cycle this, I have no idea, because this card is insanely strong. I don't know what it is with limited and given blue, just ridiculous flyers at rare. But this card is super strong. 4 mana, 4/4 flyer. If that was a vanilla creature, it'd just be a bomb already. That's super strong. You're never cycling this card. You're going to hold on to it and cast it on turn 4 and kill your opponent with it. And then anytime you cycle or discard, you get to scry one. That's a really nice bonus on top of this. Not just cycling, but if you're playing things that help you rummage or help you loot, every time you discard a card, you get to scry. And the way this is worded, the way it triggers, is if you're cycling a card, you actually get to choose whether or not you want to scry or cycle first. Or scry or draw first. So you can potentially scry and then bottom a card and then draw a new card and see 2 cards before you actually draw off your cycling, which is really sweet. Again, cycling here is almost flavor text. I don't see that happening very often. I would not discard a card like this unless I knew I was about to lose the game and had to find something else. But 4 power flyer for 4 mana with no downside at all is super strong. And probably one of Blue's best rares. These cards usually are. Think like Docent of Perfection, Niblis of Frost, Guardian of Zim. Like, look all those up. They're super strong flyers. They're on curve. They help win the game. They have extra bonus abilities. Exactly what Blue decks want to be able to close out the game. Back to that other card I was talking about. Watchful Naga is 2 and a green. For a 2/2 uncommon Naga Wizard, you may exert it as it attacks. If you do, you draw a card. Pretty simple design here. I think this card is good, but it is a little bit tricky because it is a 3 mana 2/2, and it's very likely going to just die in combat when you attack with it, unless you get a clear shot with it. The dream here is that your opponent just has nothing that can block it and you get to attack and draw a card. Woohoo. Realistically, though, that's not going to happen very often. What is nice about this card is that your opponent sees it They're going to think about it as a way to, or a card advantage machine, even if it draws a card every other turn. And they are very, very likely going to be incentivized to block it and trade off in combat with it, which I think you're fine with, because if you can kill an opponent's creature with this in combat, even if your opponent chooses which one dies, and you draw a card off of it, that seems like a fair trade. Which, I don't know, this might as well be 3 mana 2/2, when it dies, draw a card. And that would be a good card, right? If you ever get more than one card out of this, it's actually really strong. But I don't think this is like a bomb uncommon or anything like that. I do think it is a solid card. I may have to lower my expectations on it. It may turn out that this card's just not good enough. It just doesn't rumble well enough. But I think you get one hit off of it, you draw a card. If it can trade with a creature in combat, it's a justifiable card. If it gets chump blocked and you're just drawing a card, then I'm a little bit less excited by it. Moving on, we have Failure to Comply. I do not like this card. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. Failure is 1 in a blue. Remember, this is the one you cast from your hand. It is a rare. It is an instant. You return target spell to its owner's hand. This is very narrow. For those of you who may not be aware, may not be like competitive or play very much, returning a spell means a card that's currently on the cast, on the spell. Try that again. A spell is a card that's currently on the stack. So this functions as a counter spell, but it puts the card back in its owner's hand. It's not a hard counter by any means. It doesn't affect the board at all. You can't bounce a creature like Unsubstantiate would or something like that. Where you would want this is if you are a tempo deck, or if your opponent is playing a lot of really expensive spells, since this essentially makes your opponent skip their turn if you use it at the right time. If they tap out for some big 5-drop and you use Failure and bounce that back, well, they're not going to be able to recast it. If your opponent is some really hyper aggro red deck, then this card just drops off because they're probably going to be able to recast anything that you bounce back to the hand. And every now and then, I guess you could bounce one of your own spells back to your hand, but I don't see where you'd want to do that very often. This is just not a great card. It is a tempo card by nature, so if you are like a blue-white deck that wants to be just smashing your opponent with 3/1s and 2/2s and stuff like that, then I could see you wanting Failure. But as is, I don't think I'm ever first picking this card. I just don't think it's impactful enough. The second half of it, the Aftermath half, is 1 white mana for Comply. You choose a card name. Until the next turn, your opponent can't cast that card. The idea here is you failure something and then you comply it on your next turn so that your opponent can't cast it for another turn, which could be clutch if your opponent's down to like a single card or something like that. But this requires you to be blue-white. It also requires that your opponent not be able to recast the card that you failured in the first place during the same turn that you failured it. Otherwise, the comply section is kind of useless. And if you're just complying like blank, I don't know, like blindly choosing a card, then I don't know, it's not very helpful. And this effect isn't even like that strong anyway, unless like you're about to win the game and you just want to make sure your opponent can't do anything, then sure, but you're probably already in a pretty commanding position by then. I don't know, like even if you know a card in your opponent's hand, comply only stops them from playing it for a turn, which means they just wait a turn, they cast something else during that turn, and then they might have to play off curve, but you're not really hurting them that bad. So I want to point out this is probably just a blue card. You don't have to be blue-white if you pick this card up. You don't ever have to cast Comply or have a plan for it or anything. If you want Failure, then you want this card, and I would just kind of not even care about Comply, even though it will come up from time to time. I don't think this is a very strong rare to start a draft off with by any means, and I wouldn't be happy to have it in a sealed pool if I were playing some sort of competitive tournament or a pre-release, because it's just not that strong. Let's go and talk about our Liliana for the set. Much better than the Planeswalker deck Liliana. Death's Majesty is her name. She's 3 and double black for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Mythic rare, obviously. Lots of really good abilities, all synergistic with each other too. The +1 ability creates a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and then you put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So make it 2/2 and mill 2. The -3 returns a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then it becomes a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And the -7 destroys all non-zombie creatures. Now, the -7 is not a straight-up game-winning emblem or anything like that. The same way the other Liliana is, the 3-mana Liliana that's in Standard right now. That emblem just wins you the game. This one does not, but it plays a nice control role. If you're able to let this survive, the idea is you tick it up to 6, you tick it up to 7, you have 2 zombie tokens. Hopefully the mill is relevant for you. And then if you need to, you -7, you get to keep your zombies, and your opponent's creatures are all dead, unless they happen to be on prized amalgam.deck, and then you're just really sad. The -3 is where a lot of the power in this card comes from, because it can reanimate any creature at all. And if you... I lost my train of thought there, but oh yeah, if you look at most cards that do that, or most Planeswalkers that have that sort of ability, it's usually like a -X ability or something along those lines. So the fact that you can just reanimate anything at all in your graveyard is really nice. Not to mention the +1 and the -3 work together, since the +1 mills you, hopefully puts decent creatures in the graveyard, and then the -3 can get those creatures back. If you have things like Noxious Gearhulk in your deck, then whatever. That's not going to happen in Limited, obviously, but I don't know. I've transitioned into Standard there for a moment. But I like this Liliana. All the abilities are good. The +1 is pretty strong. It helps you protect Liliana while also ticking her up. Being able to tick up the Planeswalker while protecting itself is really nice. And then the -3 is just card advantage if you happen to be able to do that multiple times. Not to mention, if you -3, Liliana is still at 2, and your opponent has to deal with the creature that you put on the board, plus Liliana is still there to tick up if they let it survive. So if you can play this without being under too much pressure, it should be enough to win you the game, because it is a constant stream of card advantage. In the form of 2/2 zombies, not necessarily directly drawing cards, but very strong. This is a bomb, by all means. I think it's more of a bomb than Gideon is, as far as Limited goes, but I don't know. There are some board states with Gideon where you're just not going to be able to beat it, whereas Liliana, the person playing Liliana is going to have to make sure they play it at the right time. Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons, is another legendary creature. I really like these cheap legendary creatures for commander purposes. I like seeing what people can brew up with them. But Hapatra is 1 black and 1 green for a 2/2 human cleric, a rare legendary creature. Whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you may put a 1/1 counter, -1/-1 counter on target creature. And whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, you create a 1/1 green snake creature token with Death Touch. Now, that first ability is not going to come up very often, since this is a 2-mana 2/2. If you play it on turn 2 and your opponent just doesn't have anything, that's great, right? But that's not going to happen too often. It does have to deal combat damage, so fight spells won't work either. It's going to be very hard to get this through your opponent. Your opponent's just never going to let this hit you. They're always going to trade if they can, because they don't want the counters going on their creatures. It is worth noting you can put counters on your own creatures, but whatever. The second part is where the power in this card is. Whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on any creature, yours or your opponent's, you get a 1/1 Death Touch Snake. Now, I want to clarify something here, because I think I made this mistake when I was talking about the card Nest of Scarabs, because it's worded the same way. If you put a bunch of -1/-1 counters on the same creature all at the same time, you still only get 1 snake here, the same way you would only get 1 insect off of the Nest of Scarabs, because of the way it's worded. But I'm fairly sure, don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly sure if you have some sort of effect that puts multiple -1/-1 counters on different creatures at the same time, you get a trigger for each creature that's affected, so you would get a snake each time. This is really strong in my opinion, and there are enough cards already to support it in a lot of different colors. There are a lot of green creatures that come down and put -1/-1 counters on your own cards. There are... We've seen a black instant that can spread 2 counters on 2 different targets, which is just 2 different triggers off of her. And it is extremely important that those snakes have Death Touch too. So your opponent just doesn't get to attack you anymore for the rest of the game, as long as Hapatra's up and as long as you have something that can put -1/-1 counters on things. So this is a deck waiting to happen. I think it's super sweet. Even though I think this is not going to happen very often, it's nice that she can deal combat damage too. And if you're able to shrink your opponent's creatures down big enough, she can at least force chump blocks, or hopefully you can kill the big blockers and just get in there and take advantage of it. This can get really carried away if it's in the right sort of deck, but I'll have to see what the right sort of deck looks like and if there's actually enough support for it, but I think there will be, or at least I'm under the impression that there's already enough support for it, so we'll see what the rest of the set looks like. A couple red cards here. And then I think we've got the cards for today if they're up yet. But Soul Scar Mage is 1 red for a human wizard, a rare human wizard. It is a 1/2 with prowess. Monastery Swift Spear, anybody? And if a source you control deals non-combat damage to a creature an opponent controls, they get -1/-1 counters instead of taking that damage. So just an idea here. If you play Magma Spray on an opponent's creature, instead of dealing 2 damage to that opponent's creature, they get 2 -1/-1 counters. Notice that that's non-combat damage, so it's not like your things have Wither or anything like that. Essentially, your non-creature spells have Wither, if that means anything to you. And that's pretty good. I don't think this card's like insane or anything. Maybe it's just really good. It is a 1/2 prowess for 1, which is a very aggressive card if you have a lot of spells in your deck. But I didn't think Monastery Swift Spear was very good in limited. In fact, I would say it's like an average card for limited, and this one doesn't have haste, so it's probably even worse than that as far as just the aggressive beater goes. But I don't know. There might be some real power in that second ability. If you care about putting -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures, this is pretty nice. But keep in mind, it has to be non-combat damage, so you have to use spells or activated abilities or something like that that have to be damaging opponent's creatures. And I don't know. This does let cards like Magma Spray and these kind of weaker burn spells, it helps them take care of stronger creatures. Like Magma Spray normally wouldn't be able to deal with a 4/4, but if you Magma Sprayed it while you have this guy out, that card is now permanently a 2/2 instead, which is much more manageable for a red deck. So I like the design of this card. I don't know if, like, red doesn't seem like it's going to be like the -1/-1 counter guru or anything like that. So remains to be seen how effective this card is going to be, but I think it's a really sweet design, and I'll be on the lookout for burn spells and stuff like that really combo or interact with this card. Hazoret's Favor. Apparently Hazoret kills you once he blesses you, or you die or something like that. But 2 and a red for a rare enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have target creature you control get +2/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. If you do, sack it at the beginning of the next end step. So pretty sweet. This lets you push in a lot of damage. It is 3 mana, so it's pretty evenly costed. You can follow this up with like a 4 or 5 drop or something like that. But I don't know. This is all in, right? If you're using this on creatures that just enter the battlefield this turn to give them haste, you're losing those creatures too. So you need to make sure you're able to win that race. Otherwise, you are taking care of your own board for your opponent. If your opponent has chump blockers .deck, like, this card's not going to do what you want it to because you're going to be losing your creatures. It is a May ability. You don't have to do it, but if you include this in your deck at all, you are very aggressive deck, I imagine, and you want to be attacking constantly. I think the biggest application here is just giving a creature haste and letting it suicide into your opponent, hopefully dealing damage or something along those lines. But you can use it on creatures that have already been on the battlefield, so I don't know. It's your choice. It is a May ability, so you're not forced into using it, but if you're playing this card, you need to be all in aggro, and you need to have a plan for making sure your opponent is dead before you go sacking off your creatures willy-nilly just to trade off with your opponent's creatures or something like that. And I think that takes care of the cards we had from Thursday. So we're going to go ahead and look at this one card from Amonkhet today, and then I'm going to go to MagicSpoiler.com because there was a really cool card that was spoiled today, but it doesn't appear to be on Mythic Spoiler yet. The card is Cruel Reality. This is another one of those story spotlight cards. The last one was the Cycle and Gain Life card, where Gideon's like, hey, gods, this place is awesome. But Cruel Reality, not awesome. This is a mythic rare for some reason. 5 and double black for a curse. I just learned this, actually. Curses are not evergreen, but they're a subtype, and subtypes can appear in any set. So Cruel Reality, or curses can appear in pretty much any set. And was there a curse in Kaladesh? I don't remember if there's a curse in Kaladesh or not, but they're not tied strictly to like Innistrad or anything like that. But anyway, 7 mana to enchant a player, probably your opponent, I would guess. At the beginning of an enchanted player's upkeep, that player sacks a creature or a planeswalker. If they can't, he or she loses 5 life. I think your opponent doesn't get the choice to lose 5 life. I think they have to sack a creature or planeswalker if they're able to. And then if they just don't have that option at all, they lose 5 life. I don't know. This doesn't seem mythic rare to me. Like, I don't know, 7 mana is so much for this. This is going to cost like 6 or 5, I don't know. Maybe 5 would be pushing it, but this is so expensive. Your opponent's going to have a game plan. I don't know. If this is your top end, like you're just a dirtily stupid deck or something like that, then yeah, I could see you just walling up and using this as your win condition, right? But I don't know. It's so expensive. If your opponent's aggro, they don't care. They're just gonna, you're dead by the time you play this, right? But I don't know. I think this card is fine. I think it's playable. I think it's actually even slightly good, but it's not like this is a mythic rare. This doesn't have to be mythic rare. This is just a rare quality card. There's nothing mythic about this. It's not like super overwhelmingly powerful. If you play it on an empty board and your opponent's top deck and they just can't win the game anymore, but that's something to be said. I don't know. We also haven't seen really any enchantment removal, I don't think, yet, so maybe it's going to be hard to deal with this, but I don't know. I'm curious to see what you guys think about that one. But let's hop on over to Magic Spoiler real quick. And let's look at that card that I was talking about, because this card's really cool. I think it's called Ascension. Oh, Approach of the Second Sun. That's a translation, so I don't know exactly what it's called. But check this out. This is a rough translation from MagicSpoiler.com. If this card was cast from your hand and you cast another spell with the same name during this game, you win the game. If not, you gain 5 life and put this card back into your library as the 7th card from the top. So 7 turns later, you win the game, right? I like this card. I think this card is sweet. Is it good? I don't know. But it's sweet, right? So the way it works is you cast it the first time and you gain 7 life and it goes 7 cards deep into your library, and then you cast it. I should mention this thing costs 7 to cast, right? And it's a rare sorcery. But if you've already cast a card with this name during the game, you win. And that's just it. There were a lot of comments below this. I want to clarify something in case you're confused on how this works. There is no trigger on cast. Nothing happens when you cast this card. There are only effects when it resolves, but the resolution of the spell is going to check to see how many of this card were cast during this turn. So what that means is when you cast the second one, you don't automatically win. Your opponent can still counter this, and you don't get to win the game. It's not how it works. There's no trigger on cast because of the way it's worded. It would have to say when you cast this card, win the game of blah blah blah, not if you cast on resolution. But anyway, is this card good for limited? Possibly. Same as the card we just looked at. It's so expensive, right? Why isn't this mythic rare? I don't know. Just make random cards mythic rares, right? If they win the game, it should be mythic. But I think this card is cool, and that's why I wanted to go ahead and put it in today's video. I don't know if it's good, but it's definitely cool. It gives you a game plan, and 7 mana for 7 life is not good, but 7 mana to win the game is pretty sweet. Essentially, this is like 7 mana, suspend 7, you win the game. And if your opponent can't deal with that and you just wall up for 7 turns, what do you do? I don't know. I see this happening in Commander a lot too, which is really annoying because you can fetch this with like Mystical Tutor or something like that. But yeah, this card's pretty neat. With that being said, that's going to go ahead and take care of things today. Do I advocate for playing this in limited? I don't really know. If it's a really, really slow format, and we're talking like Khans of Tarkir slow, where everything's a wall with 8 toughness and it's impossible to deal damage and so on and so forth, then sure, this card can be a win condition. But I don't know. I just think it's really sweet. I'm curious to know what you guys think about it. But anyway, that's going to go ahead and take care of our spoilers for today. I know more spoilers will be coming out here in just a little bit for Friday, and then we'll have the weekend off, and then we'll get the rest of the set next week. But so far, I like what I'm seeing. I think the set's cool. I think it's very strategic and very challenging, but a lot of janky things going on too. Anyway, we'll go ahead and stop the video there. My name's Timothy. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see y'all next time.